Hey guys, this is Cornell from the No Such Thing podcast, and I have with me Jeff Harding. And if you haven't heard his experience, go back to my last show. That's dedicated to his encounter with Bigfoot when he was 18 years old, and that's really, really interesting. Now, Jeff works in tandem with Doug Hajicek, and they employ new research techniques. Hopefully, at some point, Doug can join us. And we have some photographs to show you. We'll also have a question thing at the very end. So let me introduce Jeff Harding.
Hey guys.
Jeff, how's it going?
Good.
So I'm sure everybody here has seen your encounter story, but called where to start. We don't have Doug, so we can't start with the Doug thing. So we'll start before that.
He'll be popping in here just within a few minutes. He's just
right. Yeah. Talk about like you have all those years where you didn't really consider Bigfoot at all. You just put it out of your mind. Yeah. So when you come back, that's where we ended.
Yeah. So the encounter happened when I was 18 years old. And I spent the following 6 years in the military. Was kind of turning a new chapter, so it wasn't extremely difficult for me to kind of, move on a little bit, so to speak. But still had felt like a little bit of a burden that you're carrying around, that something's happened to you that you feel like you can't talk to anybody about. And then after that, I started, my professional career for 13 years. I was the general manager of a car dealership and evolved from that into real estate.
Were you a sales guy?
Well, I started as a sales guy for a year or two, but then just started being the general manager after a while.
Well,
nobody else wanted to do it.
I hope you were ethical.
Oh, yeah.
I've got screwed a couple of times.
That's why I got into real estate. Is I wanted to really work in an industry where I could utilize that whole build value in something and relate to people and clients, but also feel like there is an ethical end to it, of each transaction. And unfortunately, you can't control if a car breaks down 3 months after somebody buys it. I didn't know it was going to do that, but it does. And then you're the bad guy, right? So,
right.
It wouldn't matter how nice the car was. They're all susceptible to breaking down. So for me, a lot of it was just getting into kind of I wanted to be involved in an industry where I could build relationships and just keep, progressing forward with those relationships. So real estate for me was a big deal. I really enjoyed it. Kind of advanced to where we got into development, buying properties, developing them, selling them. But throughout that whole stint, I'm 53 now. And I had a business partner who was a multimillionaire. I had people that I worked with that I just felt like I couldn't risk their trust or whatever. I couldn't confide in them. What if they knew that I made this, that I shared an account and they felt that I was, maybe not believable or something, so I just had a lot to lose. And that's why I waited so long. And once I turned 50, I just got to the point where I didn't really give a crap anymore. I mean, I'd reached a point in my professional career where, if you don't believe me, I don't care. That burden isn't mine,
Well, Doug Hajicek has joined the chat. Great to have you, Doug.
Hello, Cornell. How are you?
Oh, I'm very excited. Some bombs you'll be dropping on us tonight, hopefully. It's good to see you back. I know. When is Legend Meets Sangs 2 coming out?
Well, we're hoping September of 2022. That's kind of my goal. And it could be a little earlier. It could be a little bit later.
It's a lot goes on in the production of that. So,
right.
I mean, it's a lot of work for Doug to, I would imagine. I mean, just the amount of material. He shared with me some of the material that he's planning on putting in it, and it's extensive and exhausting work. It's not something you could pound out in 30 days, you know.
And that's the new documentary shows that it's all about the new techniques that you guys employ.
Yeah, I mean, we're really going to focus on a micro level for part of it, subatomic level for another, genomic level. So we're really going, a lot of the show, probably at least half, is just all about this small Cornell. And all this stuff requires, very high labs. And we're going to be working with a huge number of labs. And we're hoping to get definitive answers on things that people haven't even considered or even thought about before, as evidence. Because everybody thinks of evidence right now as a game trail camera photo or a video. And nobody thinks of, things like skin oil, skin cells in skin oil, chemical compound of skin oil, things that you can, by reverse engineering things, you can prove that we have an unknown animal living in North America. That it couldn't be faked, it couldn't be human, can't be a bear, can't be anything. And to me, those are the kinds of things that I'm really excited about. Super excited.
So it's futile to try to capture this thing, on a trail cam or
no, not at all. Not at all. I don't think so at all. I just think that people need to change it up, and we're changing it up, and I'm working with Jeff, and he's changing it up, and we're adding. We'll probably, me and Adam will probably end up having, I'm guessing 100 cameras out, in hotspot areas before the dock hits, because we're going to wait till the last second. But will the dock depend on footage? No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, we're going to be enhancing the Patterson footage like it's never been seen before. We're going to be focusing on, muscle movements like it's never been seen. There's just such a wide variety of things that we're doing. And I guarantee every single one will be new. None of them are going to be things that have been in previous docs or other TV shows. Everything will be new.
Definitely
Doug, because
no
some of that
knocking or whooping then.
Some of that's kind of, people are watching this saying, well, I thought they already did advance the Patterson. I thought they did microanalyze it. Not to the degree that Doug's planning on doing it. I mean, this truly is going to be a completely different, innovative, technological look at that footage. And so people have in their mind, well, it's already been enhanced. It's already been not to the level that Legend Meets Science 2 is going to present.
No, but that's just one of many things that we're doing. So I'm not even hanging my hat on any one thing.
Right.
But we're just going to go so deep, and in every category, we're going to get your light bulb to go off. We're going to get not only researchers' lights to go off, but all the skeptics out there, all the people that really don't know much about the topic. I think you're going to walk away with a sense of, oh my God, I had no idea. There was that much evidence, because the evidence in many cases, it's been in front of our noses all along. And so we're just going to then, bring things that literally we've all been tripping across forever, including DNA. Every time somebody walks out in the woods, they may be walking over some of the best DNA ever collected. They don't even know about it.
Plus it's $10,000 to get analyzed, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's real expensive. Yep.
Yeah. So where do you go?
We're actually going to be analyzing so many samples that we're hoping to set the actual baseline for Bigfoot DNA. So it'll be in the GenBank. When we're done, this will end up in the GenBank. We have so many samples. It's actually scares me how many samples we do have because of the costs. We're planning on taking these highly vetted samples and doing everything correctly. All the criticism like Melba got, right?
Oh yeah.
You can just take the long list of criticism that she suffered through, and we're not going to make any mistakes. We're working with just really top-notch people, some really top-notch people. So it'll be amazing.
I think one of the cool things about Doug's target for what he's trying to achieve with Legend Meets Science 2 is that, like he said, it's not being made for just for researchers like us or believers, so to speak. And it's not being targeting just the skeptics either. I mean, both those sides still make up a relatively small percentage of humans. I mean, a lot of people aren't even connected to the subject. I mean, whether you're a believer or a skeptic, I'd say probably that only, let's just suppose that makes up 20% of the people who, if you brought up the topic of Bigfoot, 80% of them aren't, they don't even know where to start with an opinion. This is a documentary that can bring them, because when you discuss how this is going to look when we prove its existence through DNA and all this, and it's recognized in science, all the believers are going to say, I told you so. All the skeptics are going to say, wow, I was wrong. And yet 80% of the people who aren't even connected to it, they're starting from scratch and trying to digest what this means, right? So this documentary is kind of presenting this to somebody who's really not even connected to the topic, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we're going to go after the skeptics.
You think it'll work?
I know it will.
Really?
There's no reason it won't. There's no reason it won't. We've got thousands of skin cells, right? We need only 15. But our goal is to just keep retesting samples. We have many, many hair samples that have been highly vetted. Jeff got one today that was highly vetted. Those are the kinds of things that there's actually some scientists and labs anxiously awaiting for some very, very good samples, and enough where they can keep repeating what they're doing, from different parts of the country. Because everything's been done up until today. Everything's been done wrong, period. But once again, DNA is just going to be a small part of this. I'm not hanging my hat on DNA or, the skin oil, or, looking at the mouth castings, bite marks, all these things. I mean, they just all add up. We're looking at 20 pieces of brand new evidence.
Is some of this the oil you found in the balloons, Jeff?
Yeah.
Is that included?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're looking at different sources of DNA. That's a great source of DNA. And it's one that I've found to be the techniques that I use in research. It's easily I found that it's easy to, it may be luck. It may just be that I'm working within an environment that just everything lined up, but I'm finding it easy to get it curious enough to touch something. I don't need it to step on a nail and bleed. I just need it to touch something.
Like it did in that,
and I can collect DNA from that.
Like it did in the cabin. What's the cabin again, Doug?
Oh, Snellgrove, yeah.
Oh, Snellgrove.
Yeah.
That's when it stepped on a nail.
There would have been just tons of DNA in that.
Oh my God. Yeah, for sure.
There would have been tons
One of the things that me and Doug have talked a lot about is, the research that most people do. They're trying to achieve one of four things. They're either trying to get photo or video evidence. 2, they're trying to collect DNA. 3, they're looking to get a casting or a footprint casting. And then the fourth one would be an audio recording. Okay. And a lot of times you see somebody will get one of those, right? But then there's these rare circumstances in which you see where somebody ends up with 2 of them. That's what was authentic and really intriguing about the Patterson-Gimlin film is way back when they did it, they not only had video, but they got castings from there. They knew where it had walked. They cast footprints. And if you think about it, had they been aware of the importance of DNA, they probably could have collected a wealth of DNA from that site. I mean, they knew where it had traveled. They probably could have found hair samples. And so, I mean, that was just one of those things where they didn't just have one of those 4 components. And if you look at, I've heard Doug speak on this before. I mean, just one of those components, there's always going to be skepticism of it. I mean, there'll be somebody, we've ran into issues where when Doug says, well, the forensic stuff that labs have done up till this point has kind of been crap, right? But a lot of that problem is because you got 20 different labs analyzing 20 different samples. And then when they run into this whole, it's an unknown primate roadblock, they identify that some of these components match human components, but then others, they don't. And that's where it stops for them. How far do they dive into the nuclear DNA level and really start saying, well, look, let's not stop there. What if one lab analyzed, let's say, 30 different samples from 15 or 20 different individual specimens? They can run into that same roadblock, but then they start dropping them into slots. Does sample 1 match sample 2? Does sample 2 match sample 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and so on? And now you start creating this baseline where when you're analyzing it to that depth, you start cataloging what everybody's up till this point has considered doesn't match. Well, do they all match each other? And if they do, let's start figuring out and recognizing that a sample coming from Washington State, a sample coming from Minnesota, where me and Doug are at, a sample coming from New York, if they're starting to match, then obviously you have a baseline for a creature that exists. This isn't a myth, But my research was kind of designed to be what I would call a tiered research. I'm trying to collect DNA through hair samples and sebum samples. I want to get it to touch stuff.
Sebum. And I listened to your interview. I thought you were saying semen.
No. Well, I hope it's not.
That's what it sounded like in the last interview I was listening to. Who were you talking to? Oh, it was the guys in it was Western New York Bigfoot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought you were saying semen.
Well, I use simple words like sebum. When I refer to it, the waxy type residue from the skin, I refer to it as sebum. Now, Doug's got fancier words for it, but that's because, he's been doing a lot longer than me. And maybe, Doug, it might be helpful for some of the folks that are just joining us or really don't have a lot of background on it to explain why we suspect that they have that and how it compares to ours. You were sharing some research today with me on how a lab had compared the skin oil or the secretion from skin between chimpanzees, apes, humans, and all this. Tell us a little bit about that, and I think people would find it informative.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so all of the different, hold on here. All of the different skin oils from all these different animals have different chemical compounds. Humans and gorillas share a lot of the compounds, but there's 2 in particular that gorillas have or don't have compared to humans. One is triglycerides. We have a ton of it in our sebum. Gorillas have none, or just the tiniest amount. Certain types of squalene. We have a ton of squalene in our sebum or our skin oil. Gorillas have none. So if we can, once we break down exactly what's in the skin oil of a Bigfoot, then at that point, let's say it matches orangutan perfectly, but we can keep collecting samples week after week, year after year. I mean, that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows, Cornell. Because we don't have gorillas and orangutans running around North America. I mean, that's just one example, but the true name is SSL for these skin oils. It's basically made of a whole bunch of lipids and proteins and waxes and chemicals. But there's there's about 12 different unique chemicals to our skin oil. And all of the primates all have the same chemicals, but some have hardly any, of like squalene, because squalene protects us from UV light. And a gorilla doesn't need protection from UV light because it's covered with hair. So just through evolution that the skin oils change. But the other thing is gorillas, orangutans, chimps, and great apes have a real thick, waxy, hard to remove skin oil. Where ours is pretty clear. We touch, you touch your iPhone and it leaves kind of a thin, you see a fingerprint, but it's not thick and white. Where Bigfoot's, from what we can gather, it's a very, very waxy white.
Secretion.
It almost looks like dust.
It's interesting because
like wet dust.
Pardon, Cornell?
Like wet dust, like dust with some moisture in it.
No, not really. I sent you some photos of what it looks like, and it's very white, very kind of a whitish gray. And it's hard to get off, extremely hard to get off. If you get it on your window, you're going to have a hard time scrubbing it off.
Wow.
When I get it on the objects that I leave in the field, like the ball, I sent a picture of it to you, the ball that I use. The ball is got Velcro tabs on it. There's 6 of them. And it's designed so that when this thing picks up this ball, that it will leave a hair sample on it. And but it also leaves these prints and these sebum smears on it. And I've been having a hard time trying to figure out exactly how to get a really good print with dermal ridges and all of that. But because what will happen is it leaves a detailed print, I believe. I can see the outlines of them. But then when it's carrying this ball around and it presses it against its body and its body hair or kicks it through the weeds, it ends up getting smeared and deteriorated. Right. But I still have the sebum all over the ball. And it's interesting because, like, if you touched a window, I might not notice your fingerprint. I mean, it takes forensic teams to dust them with white powder and look at them under different light to reveal where your fingerprint was. When a Bigfoot touches this ball that I'm using, I don't need a microscope. I can see it with the naked eye. It looks like
it won't come up.
A kind of a clearish white candle wax that is about 3/4 dried, a very thin sheen of it.
Yeah, Jeff is collecting just kind of the classic white waxy sebum when they're touching it. Plus, he's got that Velcro on there and he's getting hair. And I've looked at, like today, I looked at the hair. It's just classic Bigfoot. Thin, almost transparent, very little medulla, tapered end, and very wispy.
Let me see if I can share this. For some reason, it's not coming up on the screen. Oh, did you see it on the screen?
It comes up for a second.
I'm looking because I see the black screen.
Oh my God.
It's supposed to be.
I don't know why it's disappearing.
You're putting it up, Cornell, and the government's instantly taking it down.
That's what it is. That's exactly what it is, Doug. I knew it. I'm one of those guys that sits when I'm bored, I just sit and watch conspiracy videos, 9/11 JFK. Yeah, I'll sit for hours and watch that stuff. Hold on. Yeah, I don't know why it's disappearing. I you know what I'm going to do is put them up in my community tab. It sucks, but every time I bring one up, it disappears. Let me try one more time.
I see Jeff's getting his laptop. Maybe he can show us.
Well, I was going to see if I can pull them up on here and just share them from here. Yeah.
Oh, you might be able to. Yeah, I never thought of that. Thank you.
So we'll see if pull this up here.
I'm trying to get the blue feather up, and I can't get the damn blue feather.
So if you look really close at that Velcro tab and the blue ball, you'll see that there is a white haze around that tab. That's the sebum. You can see it in the very bottom right corner of that picture, kind of smeared up but then also, I don't know if you can see it real close. I'm going to zoom this in so you can see it maybe a little even better.
Yeah, it's in the far right corner.
There is a hair hanging in that Velcro tab.
Yep, right from the bottom.
Yeah, I see it, like a gray hair.
Yeah,
It
like
looks now.
it's
When I first grabbed it, I thought it was a gray hair, and then I started looking at it and realized what I'm seeing is that I can see through that hair in a lot of
Translucent.
areas of it. There are areas of the hair where it kind of blends into a brownish hue, but much of it is kind of like see-through. Like if you put an ounce of Coca-Cola in 2 ounces of water and put it in a glass and looked through it. You know what I mean? It's like you can see through it.
The color of lake water.
Yeah, and the reason that is Bigfoot hairs have very little or no medulla, the core, which is where all the pigment is.
Right.
And so it's not hollow per se, but it's very, very translucent. And there's a little bit at the end, but that's just classic Bigfoot hair.
So you can't see through it, but you can see that it's
semi-transparent. Yeah.
Right. Just by looking at it, with your own eyes.
I mean, there's a lot of biological reasons why that, why do Bigfoots have such interesting hair? Some people have speculated, well, it's one way they camouflage because it reflects and refracts the light around them. Which is probably the most interesting theory.
Don't polar bears have the same thing, or am I?
They have a similar thing, yes. Yep. So they can blend in with the snow.
That's what I
They
thought.
used to think that their hair would channel UV light to their black skin, but there's now scientists saying that's just not true. Acting like a fiber optic camera or a fiber optic tube.
Right.
But there's scientists that are arguing with that. So who knows? It's some adaptive quality, that aids in their survival. And the ones that have gone on with no or little medulla in their hair have gone on to breed and survive.
Now, isn't the medulla the little ball at the very end when you pull it out?
No, it's the core.
Oh, okay.
The actual core. It's the pigmented core at the center of the hair.
Because I thought all the DNA was in the little ball at the bottom. Is that true?
There's other really interesting morphology that we're going to explore in Legend Meets Science. And we're going to go deeper into the morphology of Bigfoot here in this documentary. But one of the things that's never been looked at, how many scales are on the shaft around the diameter? Humans have about 6 or 7 around the diameter. And Cindy Dawson was the one that noticed that all of the Bigfoot hairs only have 5. So what we need to do now is get these hairs in labs under ES microscopes, electro scanning microscopes, to get down to a molecular level where we can count. And once again, if I can provide 500 hairs, right, taken in different locations that have the same morphology, tapered end, no medulla, 5 human scales, right, human-like scales around the diameter, and I can challenge a scientist, go out and find one hair just like that. Somewhere in the world, they won't be able to.
Mm-hmm.
But you must have friends in the scientific community that are willing to look at this, right?
Oh, God, yes. Yes. In fact, I've been meeting with people every single day, scientists, and getting them excited, getting them educated on what we're going to do. And they're all gung-ho. I mean, I have not run into one lab yet that wasn't gung-ho to work with us.
Well, that destroys the narrative, right?
Yeah.
That totally destroys the narrative, because we've been told up to this point that, the scientists still want to look at it. And here you are saying that scientists are happy to look at it.
I'm finding the exact opposite.
Wow.
But you got to remember, are they going to, on their own, suddenly take up Bigfoot research and go out and do that? Not many. Although,
yeah,
I've been meeting at least 2 scientists per week that are doing Bigfoot research in secret.
Really?
2 per week.
Wow. That's a
They're
bombshell.
they're hedging their bets, so to speak.
Exactly. They're not ready.
I mean, for a long time, scientists have just said, hey, you know, there ain't enough proof, right? But now we keep evolving. DNA is getting better. You know, everything's advancing in science to where, do you really want to be the scientist who sat there on your pedestal of there's no way it can be?
They want to be ahead of the
When
curve.
it's pulled off. Yeah. So I think
they'll
there's
be
a
the
lot of
authority.
scientists that are now saying they're not on board saying, hey, we totally believe like you do. But I think they're to the point where if you've got legitimate evidence, we want to be involved in analyzing it.
Well, that's
We
awesome.
aren't afraid to step forward and say, let's look at it, you know.
I talked to an anthropologist the other night. This guy's been doing research for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. He's now ready to pop his head forward. He's going to be involved in the doc. You know, these are guys like Jeff Meldrum, but they're new. They're new to the world. And that's, I mean, I can't be any more excited. So if I can end up getting, even in this doc, you know, 25, 30 scientists involved in it, and we get good results on some, maybe most of the experiments that we're doing, it's going to definitely have an effect on the scientific community. There's no doubt in my mind. We're not going to feel alone anymore.
Well, and you've also got to put some stock into the decades now that these pioneers, they've been mentoring people. They've been bringing people up and getting them ready to pass the baton to. I mean, it was sad when we lost John Bendenagel and people in this community. I mean, they're getting, some of these pioneers are getting up there in age, but you look at Jeff Meldrum, how many students that have been through his university with him as a professor and studied alongside of him and have been groomed to be set forth and say, go look at things with an open mind and figure out where the science is. Just follow the science, you know. And I think we're starting to reap the benefits of that, in that we aren't just a bunch of small groups of researchers who are passionate about it, but the field of experts, so to speak, is growing every day, you know.
No, but I was going to ask about you. Oh, he's back. I was going to ask, like, where do you guys come in? I mean, what's your relationship to each other with this research? And you do research that's not featured in the documentary, right?
Jeff is just the guy that keeps me up all night. That's all.
So when I started doing research and started finding, I knew what kind of research I wanted to do. I had looked at all these things that aren't working, so to speak. I mean, I looked at, there's 1 million game cameras out there, and we've got 1 billion pictures of deer, and we have less than a handful of even non-blobby pictures of what people claim would be a Sasquatch. I mean, why is this such a low percentage production when you consider how many efforts are being made at that? And so I started, you know, there is a reason why, right? It's just understanding why it is. And that's the approach that I took was.
Why is it though?
Well, okay. So to answer your first question, I had started researching simply by deploying this red rubber ball that I use. And I went out into remote clearings that are surrounded with heavy forest and would play with the ball. I'd kick it, throw it in the air, laugh at it. I'd drop kick it, and I'd pick it up and laugh at it. And I'd do this for like an hour, and then I'd leave it lay in the meadow, and I would come back the next day and see if it's been moved. And I did that with like 4 different meadows before I finally found one that is really off the grid. I mean, it's way off the grid, and it had been moved. And I thought, well, that's kind of was the first step that I was looking for, is perhaps I was being watched. Something was curious. This ball had been moved 80 yards across this meadow. And so I started figuring out, okay, well, let's do it again. Because like I've told you before, Cornell, in my mind, one time is chance. 2 times can still be a fluke. 3 times you might be onto something, but that 4th time that something happens in research, you can look at it and say, I'm developing a pattern here. This isn't coincidence at that point. There's a theory to draw from this. And so
sorry to interrupt, but what makes you think that? Have you ruled out it being the wind because it's a pretty light ball? Would it have been? Now, what evidence have you to back up that it wasn't the wind?
So,
you had some, I know you do have something.
What I was doing is when I first started doing this, I was always going in on a Thursday and then I'd pick it up on Friday. And these are areas that I had to kayak several hours into just to get to where these clearings were. I had discovered them while snowmobiling the winter before. And what I was noticing is if it was bare, I mean, you've seen the picture of the ball. This is the $2 rubber ball you buy in the bin at Walmart, right? I mean, if a bear with claws was to even just put minimal pressure on it, it would puncture that ball. I can't even sit on that ball probably without blowing it out. So I knew that likely it wasn't an animal that, I mean, there's nothing that would pick it up and move it 80 yards like that without puncturing it. And at that time, I was seeing smears on the ball. And at first I suspected is there a bear licking this thing? I mean, is it just moving it with its nose? Well, if it was moved 5 or 10 feet, I'd say, well, that could be. But it's been moved clear across the meadow. And this meadow is surrounded by birch, poplar, and pines that are 50 feet tall. And we're talking a clearing that's about 60 yards square. And I'd always figure out where's the wind coming from. If I had any breeze forecasted that night, I'd put it on the downwind side of the meadow so that it couldn't be that it blew across the meadow.
Smart. There we go. That's my answer.
So after I started, I'd kind of gone to where, hey, look, it's fun that something's moving this ball. Something's interacting with me, right? But I started thinking, okay, I want to start leaving other items. And where do I go with that? And at that point, I had started talking to Doug online. And I said, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what's happening. Here's the results I'm getting. Doug only lives, he's very close to me. We're both in Minnesota. So I thought this would maybe be a good mentor to kind of pick his brain because he's really close. He understands the environment I'm working in. Weather stuff, when I say, hey, it's been dry, he gets what I'm saying because we're in the same area. And so we started talking about a lot of different things. I mean, we'd have conversations that would go hours into like 2, 3 in the morning, and anybody who doesn't know us about Doug, he is the epitome of the night owl. I mean, he probably survives on about 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and he's up working on something all the time.
Is that true? Is that true, Doug?
Yep.
That's not enough.
Yeah.
So a lot of nights, 2 hours.
You're like Margaret Thatcher. She governed England with 3 hours of sleep a night. So if she can do it, you can do it.
Life is short, Cornell. A lot to do.
I know. I totally agree.
I'd shoot Doug a message on Messenger at like midnight saying, I just had this idea. What do you think about this? And I'd type it and send it to him with the idea that, well, he'll see it tomorrow and get back to me. Like 10 seconds later, I see he's typing and he's up. It's 2 in the morning. I'll see him replying. And a lot of times we started talking. And by chance, we realized something interesting. And that's that. Hold on, let me stop this from beeping. That's that Doug had a theory that there's a lot of animals out there that see in a UV light spectrum. Caribou.
Well, let him tell it because it's his theory.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. first started with thinking that bears could see in UV light. Then doing more reading, finding out they had just discovered caribou can see in UV light, which is an Arctic animal, an animal from the north, I don't think anybody disagrees that Bigfoot, if it came across a land bridge, or whether it's even some relative of early man, it came across, the northern land bridge. And so it's going to have to be adapted to the far north, to the montane forest. And so my theory was just that we need to really look into the fact that Bigfoots may see an EV spectrum, which could be the answer why none of us are getting game trail cameras photos. I mean, there's some reason that I'm sick of just jumping to the paranormal, aspect constantly.
Right.
There's several things that could cause us to not get game trail photos. One, they're
coding.
One, they're extremely intelligent, and they just might be beating. In other words, let's say you leave an apple, you can easily run and grab, even a human can run and grab the apple before, the shutter goes off. And I recommend everybody try that. Prove it to themselves. Take their game trail camera, put it in the backyard, grab an apple, and see if you can, try to beat the game trail camera. And they will every time.
Never heard of that.
Because everybody thinks that they're just instantly going to get, whatever subject's going in there. So when I see, and I talk to at least 2-3 people a year where they go, it got the bait, but we don't know what took the bait. It doesn't surprise me. They're not that quick. And so, but what bothered me is how are they seeing the darn cameras? And then I've heard all the things. They make noise. They see an EV or the IR spectrum. They can see the IR lights. Yet the IR lights are off until the camera's triggered, so you can't see them. On and on and on. I just kept hearing all these reasons.
I didn't realize that. I thought the light was always on.
No, they're just on. It's a what they call a black flash. So when something walks in front, the passive sensor is triggered. Then it sends a signal to turn the IR lights on and snap a picture.
But there's a delay in that.
Yep.
You're saying.
Yep, it's actually quite a delay.
Is it in seconds or milliseconds?
Well, you go ahead and go in get a game.
I'm gonna have to try this.
And you're going to have to just share the results, or people should do it and share the results with you. It'd make for a very interesting little segment in your show.
Well, and anybody who uses the cams I'm a big archery hunter. I mean, I got more pictures of the ass end of deer than I do of their front ends, because walking past a camera at 5 miles an hour, by the time you've triggered it, by the time it engages, gets the IRs on and snaps that picture, you've already traveled half the frame just at a walking pace, So, and the game cameras are getting better. They're getting faster, but, that's as of recent. I mean, for years, game cameras have existed, and they just weren't producing. So one night when me and Doug were talking about, he's sharing this UV light spectrum theory. I said, I used to own a business that dealt with blacklight technology, ultraviolet light, and fluorescent colors. And I'd done a lot of research and studying in this. And I remember Doug saying that, and what's the chances of me having this theory? And now you've got the experience of what that, kind of looks like as far as, the technical aspect of UV and what reacts and what doesn't in UV vision. And
before you go any farther, John, I'm going to let you take back over again. But I was just going to mention that there are so many animals they keep discovering that can see in UV. Cats and dogs. I just discovered that today. Now pretty much everybody agrees.
So did I.
Pardon? You'd never
heard
did
I.
Yeah.
No, I didn't know cats and dogs could see in UV.
Yes, so they can see an UV spectrum. The other thing that you have to know is that there's many types of vision. There's, like we have trichronomat vision where we see red, green, and blue, radar. We have these cones that can pick up those colors. But other animals are just mono. They can only see black and white. But my point is, it doesn't matter how many cones you have. If you, like a butterfly, can see in 5 different spectrums, or we only see in 3. They have better eyesight than we do in many cases.
They can see heat, right? That kind of stuff. But, or is that the predator?
But it doesn't matter what type of vision you have. Many of those animals still can see in UV. Even if they have black and white vision, they can still see in UV. Wow. So the variety of animals that see in UV is immense. There's even humans now, because of cataract surgeries that are going on, where they're removing the UV filter and they're getting new lenses without the UV filter in it.
Wow.
And they now can see in UV.
I don't know what that looks like. I'm going to have to Google what that actually looks like. Well, it's hard to bring up.
Well, yeah, I'm going to let Jeff explain that a little bit more. But my point is UV light is in a lot of mammals, a lot of birds, a lot of insects, even where their vision isn't as good as ours or as acute, they can still see in UV. And UV does a lot of things. I mean, for instance, if you take a UV flashlight and go into your restroom, you're going to see urine splatters all over the walls.
Yeah.
You just are.
That's the cops use, right?
Well, it's just, yeah. I mean, if you bring one in a hotel room, you won't want to sleep.
I know.
Because there's, proteins and things in the UV, there's proteins that glow in the UV spectrum. And you can imagine, if you were a hunter and wanted to see urine if you were hunting toads and lizards and mice, you could see all of your urine trails and glow in the dark.
Right.
So you could follow and find those animals.
And there's some chemicals that will exaggerate that, like when detectives and forensics look at a murder scene, so to speak.
Right.
UV might show that blood a little bit, but when they spray it with a substance called luminol, it's like an electronic neon sign. Okay. Right. Like if you went out into the forest under your tree stand and you say, well, it doesn't look like there's any deer sign here. If you were to spray some luminol down here with a black light, you might fall over, seeing how much.
Okay. So they're using tandem.
Yeah. But, what we're looking at is our conversation started to evolve in not if they could, or trying to analyze how many, do they see in 3 colors or 4 colors or 5 colors or monochromatically, but simply with the UV ability, what would that look like?
Right.
And so to kind of preface that, I'll tell you one of the things we did with one of my companies, we built an encasement that was 6 foot tall, about 1.5 foot wide, and about 1 foot deep. Okay, so it was like a cabinet that had an open front. And we installed the fixtures to put 4 T40 black light fluorescent bulbs in it. And then so that they wouldn't get break or impacted by anything, we dadoed the edges and slid a piece of plexiglass into the face of it so that those lights would shine through that plexiglass. And that night we took a dark room, filled it full of different fluorescent colors and different things, plugged the light in, and nothing really happened. And we were like, this should all be glowing. What's going on here? And after a while, we slid the piece of plexiglass out and everything just exploded in color under that UV light. And we started realizing that piece of plexiglass had a UV filter in it. So it wasn't allowing the UV illumination to project and make those fluorescents and different things react the way they would normally. Now, I only bring that up because it's a good analogy to help you understand that when we stand in the night and look at a game camera that is camouflaged and strapped to a tree and there's brush around it, me or you can't see that camera probably from 10 yards away, right? But now imagine that the lens on that camera, same as every camera that's made, lens on most of our eyeglasses that we wear, the lens on lenses and binoculars, all have a UV coating on them.
Yeah, you can see them in the sun, right?
Yep.
You can see like a rainbow color.
But from the front of that lens, if you saw in UV, and this is where me and Doug were going with this conversation, is what would it look like if you saw in UV? That game camera at night from 100 feet away, that lens would look like a firefly in the dark to me or you. I mean, to me or you, the way we see something glow, that's what something that sees in UV sees. It sees that lens standing out like a firefly in pitch darkness.
But does it project like a flashlight, or is it just a ball of light?
It's just the reflection of it. Yeah, the fact that it has a UV coating on it, it sees that. Now, when we start talking about what else would look like that if you saw in UV, assuming that, let's say, Bigfoot sees in UV, what would it look at that looks predominantly different to it than if we would to look at it? And we start realizing that these game cameras that they make out of very hard plastics to resist bears chewing on them, dropping them, and damaging them, they have a product in it called acrylic resin. Now, acrylic resin is, imagine like companies like PPG Industries. They make the auto glass that's in almost every car out in a parking lot, okay? One of the byproducts of making glass is acrylic resin. And companies like Valspar, PPG that make glass, they have this stuff by the 50-gallon drum full stacked up. Those companies also own paint companies, PPG paint, Valspar paint, because acrylic resin is the most expensive product you can put in a can of paint. Acrylic resin is used in plastics. That's what makes them hard and durable. Okay, and acrylic resin has a UV coat to it. It reflects in UV light. So not just does a Bigfoot, if it has UV vision, see the lens shining bright, but the whole camera body could be illuminated in darkness to itself.
And that's what Doug said about painting it. You said about painting it black. The last time I had you on, that was one of the things that you were going to do is paint it black to cover that possible UV coming off the camera case. Right, Doug?
Yeah, I mean, we were throwing out all sorts of ideas.
Oh, okay.
Certainly one of them. So the whole point is it's just very, very much worth experimenting with. I mean, that's the bottom line. We don't know. We don't know if Bigfoots can see in UV. We don't know a lot of things, but I've been experimenting quietly without even talking to anybody or communicating with anybody for years and all sorts of things.
You're a lone wolf in that regard.
But this is one thing that Jeff was willing to, in the field, do in-field experiments in a really amazing area. And he's actively doing it. And we're experimenting with, possible colors that they can see better or favor. One thing I was noticing for years is that when I would find a structure, like some of these complex teepees in the middle of nowhere, I would often find a little blue piece of garbage. A remnant of a blue balloon, of a blue wrapper. Blue. It just kept blue. And after about the 30th time, I said, well, maybe they like blue. And I certainly mentioned it to Jeff. And Jeff is experimenting with that right now.
Right, with the blue ball this time, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I started using a red ball, but once me and Doug had evolved this conversation of the whole point of my research, like I say, it was tiered research. It was designed to what I would consider to be Bigfoot's biggest chink in its armor, so to speak, if it was to have one, would be its own curiosity. And so I don't would knock when I go in there. I don't call out to them. I don't let them know that I don't give them the impression that I'm looking for them. I go in, I played with that ball, and I looked like a really forgetful idiot that forgot his ball and left. And now over the weeks, I've been doing this for 16 weeks. I go in on Thursday, I leave items, and I go back on Friday and I retrieve them. And in the course of doing this, we've incorporated blue into the themes of the stuff that I leave. And if you can think about it in the idea that I'm trying to condition it, I'm trying to get it comfortable to explore its curiosities. One, I show up on Thursday and then I leave and I give it a 24-hour window. It could be 5 minutes after I leave. It could be at 2 in the morning, but when it's comfortable, it can explore the things I've left. I don't put electronics out there. When I put a camera out there, it has no batteries in it, believe it or not. And I've painted the whole camera fluorescent blue.
So they'll get used to it.
I'm just trying, and what I'll do is any place where I have something blue, there's a reward. I'll tie a piece of blue flagging tape around a branch and I'll leave a polished rock laying there. Or I'll take a baby food jar and put a piece of bit of honey candy in it. And I'll screw the lid on it and leave it in front of one of these blue painted game cameras. It's not giving off any signal. There is no IR reflection or UV reflection to it. There's no signal. So I don't know what Bigfoot's capable of, right? I'm not trying to figure that out. People say, well, they can sense a battery source or they can sense a power source. I don't know. That really is irrelevant to my research. What I'm doing is try to get it ultra comfortable with knowing that, hey, if I see something blue over there in the distance on the edge of this clearing tied to that tree, I want to go over there because there's usually something good there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's designed to be that way so that at the end of the research, it will end in what I've kind of come to term the ultimate betrayal.
Right.
That ball that I leave.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah. So
the ultimate
16
betrayal.
weeks. For 16 weeks, there's only been 4 weeks that it hasn't moved the ball. Okay. It always plays with the ball, leaves sebum samples on it. I get hair samples. I've collected 14 hair samples and I think it's 11 sebum samples now. But from these items and mostly from the ball. And what will happen is that last day, when I feel like it's time to land this plane, that ball isn't going to be a red rubber or a blue rubber ball from Walmart. It's going to be a 12-inch foam core that has lipstick cameras embedded in 4 sides of it with a lithium battery pack in it that powers those cameras. And the whole thing's going to be plastic dipped in blue. And it's going to be setting in the middle of that meadow. And it's going to be live. Those lithium cameras will power, that lithium battery will power 4 cameras for probably 72 hours. So I'm going to leave it on a Thursday and come back on a Friday again. But even if something started walking up to the ball from 50 yards away at the edge of that meadow from the tree line and halfway there said, ooh, I sense something. I sense a battery. It's already on camera. We're talking 4K color camera, 360 degrees around this. And those game cameras that are on the trees that are always unpowered, they're going to be powered that one night. And there's going to be audio recorders. And so the idea is that in the end, I've already got a number of DNA samples. And I'd love to have like 40 DNA samples by the time I'm done with this. But in that holy grail night, so to speak, if I could get video of one of these walking up to this, I mean, even if it sensed that camera had a power source, if in front of that game camera, I have a blue feather or a polished rock, it's going to look at that and say, for 20 some weeks, I've walked up and seen this and taken it. And I've never had anything chase me. I've never had anything call to me. It's always been safe, right? It's comfortable with the process at that point. It may sense something, but it's gonna say, damn, I really want that feather. And my gamble is that despite everything being powered up, it's already conditioned to be comfortable with that environment that I've created for a long time, for 5 months. So that's kind of the goal, is to try it on that last night, because I'm only going to have one shot at it probably. If it goes out there and says, oh, everything's powered up, I can sense that, and it leaves, it probably isn't going to come back. It will be a big betrayal, so to speak. But, I'm happy to have had the success collecting the DNA I have. I believe that that's where unlocking this whole mystery is going to come. And it's not going to be by $1 million funded Discovery Channel, so to speak, celebrities. It's going to be done by little research groups like the people that are in our chat right now watching. If we can all start thinking outside of the box and saying, what doesn't work? And I'm not taking anything away from some of the things that have been done, because Cornell, if me, you, and Doug walked out into the woods tonight at midnight and we did a tree knock and we got something to knock back, I think we'd all three agree that that's extraordinary, that that's really cool. It would be a great experience. Or if we howled and something howled back. But you got to ask yourself, are we advancing the science when that happens?
I know about snoring, because that's when they have come into our camp and they've heard. When I was snoring, Dave wasn't. It came in like about 50 yards and let a whoop. That was the last time. But this time, Dave was snoring before me, and it was the first night he had slept in the tent. Usually he sleeps out in the cot. So this night he went into the tent, and his son was in the tent too. And I snore. I know I do. So this thing heard us all snoring and walked into the camp. And then I woke up at 3:30 in the morning, and the snoring obviously stopped from my end. So it must have known that I was awake. And then it just melted into the woods. We got up like 2 minutes later and it was nothing.
Yeah. But no doubt that, maybe in that environment that it has safely approached other tents before and heard those sleeping sounds and known that it was comfortable. Nothing chased it. Nothing yelled at it.
That's true.
But once the snoring stopped, it now realizes that's usually when I get yelled at. That's usually when I get discussed. You know what I mean? So we're trying to leverage what is it comfortable with and how can we make it comfortable with things. And so what I would tell people is, a lot of research, they'll leave an apple or they'll leave something and see if they can get it to take it, right? Which if it takes it, that's great. But you collected no DNA in the process. Is there a way to do that and collect DNA? What if you left an apple at the base of a tree and took a piece of plexiglass, 12 inches square, and leaned it against the tree so the apple's under it? Now to get the apple, it has to grab the plexiglass and move it and grab the apple. And there you have a sebum sample on the plexiglass. I mean, it's just trying to tweak what we're doing to really see if we can get something back in the form of the DNA in the way that we're doing things already, maybe.
Yeah, I know. So, any questions? I would like to see them on the chat. We only got 19 people in here, but the chat is quiet.
There was a story that Doug had that was pretty cool. He was speaking at a conference in Minnesota. Tell him about, just to preface it, we had been having a conversation on that last night when everything's powered up. What's one item you could have in front of a camera that would be blue that Bigfoot would look at and say, man, I don't know if something that seems abnormal here, but I really want that, right? And I was having this conversation with Doug in detail as he was driving to this conference. And a couple hours later, he messaged me and sends me a picture. Tell him what happened, Doug.
Oh, well, we were actually, it was a little more. I think I had mentioned to you, I said, I think, or we had talked about like blue things you could leave, and one would be a blue feather. And
We
were
talked
just-
about a blue jay feather, maybe.
I saw one today, actually, when I was out hiking.
Yeah. But some lady walked up to me at the conference, supposedly a psychic. She walks up and she hands me a blue feather. And she said, "You'll know what to do with this." And walked away.
That's weird.
It was weird. That's all. It was just bizarre.
It's a synchronicity, right?
I guess, or just coincidence. Totally.
Yeah.
But I sent Jeff a picture of the feather.
I'm right in the middle where that stuff's concerned.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's the photograph that I'm supposed to be able to bring up, but I'm too incompetent and I can't. That looks that is a so that wasn't an actual feather that came off a blue jay. She had done it up or done art.
This one has actually been dyed fluorescent blue. Fluorescent blue. I mean, it's not just a subdued blue. It's as blue gets.
Yeah, it's pretty blue. It's pretty blue.
So we might be using that as bait, to stick in front of one of the cameras that are out there. See if there's something to it. But I always invite people to, like in chat, if you've got an idea of something that could be tied in with a blue theme to leave in the field. One of the things that I did this week, I went out on Thursday, and I'd never had one of these as a kid or played with one, but I had a boomerang that I painted blue. And I put a Velcro tab on the top and bottom of each end of it. And I went out in the field, played with the ball, put everything out, I have blue painted game cameras that aren't powered that I'll hang in a tree with stuff in front of it, gifts in front of it. But I took this boomerang out of my backpack, and I probably should have practiced through it before I went out there, because I chucked this thing as hard as I could, and I was really, first of all, amazed at how far and how fast it moved. And this thing turns around in midair and starts coming back at me. And I had to dive to get out of I've just about killed myself out there with this thing. And I thought, whoa, how do people, I see people catch these things. I don't know how you'd catch them without chopping your fingers off or breaking them.
I could never get it to work.
Anyways,
maybe a Bigfoot threw it back at you.
Anyways, I left it there on the edge of the clearing. And so when I came back Friday morning, that was one of the first items, other than the candy and the little gifts that I leave. That was the first really item that wasn't there. It took it. I don't know if it thought, hey, this is something I could use or
some magic. She probably watched coming through the air.
It'd be a great hunting tool if you could have the foresight to see how it would work for that. But I don't know that that's why it took it. But it took it. It wasn't
weird, because that's what the Aboriginals use, right? That was their weapon of choice.
Yeah.
In Australia, that's what I hear. So that is weird. So there you go. There's a Bigfoot family now, like using like a blue boomerang to take down its deer somewhere. That's going to spread.
About I think it was like 10 years ago, I was at the Swaddle River with John Meinzinski and Jeff Meldrum and a number of people. And John was doing a search for a certain type of lichen that he had matched up this lichen growing to where all of the sightings were all over North America. And he thought he was looking for a common a common plant that would be growing in all these sighting areas. And so there was this lichen, and literally then years later, you read about something where UV light is absorbed by lichen. Certain types of lichen, it just glows. Like if you had
tell us what lichen is, Doug.
I'm having the hard.
Different berries are, will have different levels or amounts of that.
Yeah, lichen is just it's basically it's not fungus. It's not a plant. It's a cross between plant and a fungus, a microplant. And it grows very, very slowly, right? It's rich in sugars, starch.
Oh, is that the stuff that sometimes like goes fluorescent underwater?
No,
Like,
it's just
no.
lichen is oh my God. If you've ever done any modeling and you're looking for a miniature
Yes.
tree, you use lichen because it kind of looks like miniature trees.
Oh, okay. All right, I get it.
But it grows, and you know it can grow. It can hang from trees. It can grow on the ground. Grows in the Arctic. It grows in the South. It grows everywhere. But it's
it affects the nutrient content or the protein content or whatever that's depending on what it's in. Like bears can look at two different berries and tell which one has a higher lichen content and therefore is more nutritious to them.
Yes. And obviously UV vision would allow you to see protein content. So, for instance, if you watch a bear eat, they'll eat this plant and they'll ignore that plant because that plant doesn't have as much protein in it. So they'll move on.
It was poison or something.
No, it's just literally protein content.
Wow.
And so for years, researchers have thought, well, they're using their sense of smell, which could be true, or they're using a combination of vision, but they know which one not to eat, because if you eat a plant without a good protein content, you've got to digest it. And if you have to digest, a plant that's mainly cellulose and there's no protein in it, you've just used more energy to digest it than you're going to get from it. So it's real important for animals to maintain a positive energy level. I've been on our cameras, I've been watching this one skinny bear wander around night after night looking for food, and he just looks sad.
Do you leave stuff out for him?
No, he smells every bush. He seems to just kind of aimlessly wander around looking for something to eat that would give him some nutrition versus just a bunch of empty calories. And a bear with UV vision, certainly when he finds something, he's going to eat it. It's going to have a high protein content.
Oh, wow.
So he's not going to waste eating something that's just going to take more calories to digest than what he's just, taken in.
That's pretty smart. He's smarter than me in many respects.
Yeah. If you eat celery, Cornell,
yeah,
I think it takes more calories to digest the celery than you've taken in from the celery.
Oh, I thought celery was cool.
It is good. But it's a great weight loss program.
That's why it's cool,
butter.
because it's not bad for you. There's nothing in it that's good.
Like an iceberg lettuce is the same, right? There's nothing in there.
Yeah, similar. So it was just interesting that
my favorite.
I read this article where lichen glows, absorbs UV light and glows at night. And then you couple that with your knowledge you learned 10 years earlier about how John thinks that these Bigfoots just gorge on this one type of lichen.
Okay, that's a good theory, but we got a question here. It's a big one. I don't know who wants to take that, or both of you want to take that, but yeah, like, what's your opinion? What do you want seen done? Do you want these things?
Raise the bar. Just raise the bar.
But do you want the general public to know about these?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I wouldn't be including it in a film.
Okay.
I always consider myself somebody who, I'm a curious guy. I want answers, but I'd love to share those answers.
Right. So it's not just a personal thing. You actually want the world to know. You just don't want you to know.
Absolutely.
That's where I'm stuck at. I just want me to know first.
Without question. There's a lot to be said too for the recent advancements in DNA, the ability to analyze DNA. Cameras. We look at how.
DNA, so Jeff, DNA gets better by 10-fold every year.
Yeah.
So it's scary when you start thinking about it. It'll be to the point soon where you won't be able to walk into a crime scene. They'll find one skin cell and be able to do your entire genomic sequence. 3 billion base pairs off one skin cell. That technology is coming very quickly.
That's why I lean so heavily in the targeting DNA as, one of these four things: photo and video, DNA, castings, or audio recordings.
Right.
Is I believe DNA is the key to unlock it. And I get where people are like, well, geez, haven't we done this? Haven't we had all these samples? You got to understand that, look where we were 20 years ago with camera technology, and you look where we are now with 4K color cameras, right? And you get how small they can be, how concealable they can be, how low power draw they are. You kind of ask yourself, how much better can they really make a camera than they do now, right? And so that some of this technology is kind of going to cap, right, to where it's like, I don't know how much. When it comes to the plaster, the stuff you pour in a casting, I mean, how much better is it going to get than it is now? But when you're looking at DNA, what we were able to analyze and unlock running DNA through a lab 2 years ago and what you are now is completely two different things. And that's why the idea of basing or base mapping a collection of these other unknown primate DNA samples and starting to draw a critical base of different specimens from different parts of the country. Yeah, you don't know what they are, but are they all the same? And if they are, now we've got something to recognize. That the technology and the depth they can do it at now versus what they could do it even just a year or two ago is really just continuously evolving almost every week. So, there is a lot of importance in DNA collection.
We just don't see this on YouTube, right? I mean, everything's about like just stupid videos and memes and wild claims and like audio recordings. It's like a jungle. That's
well, a lot of it, we live for the experience. I mean, a lot of researchers live for the experience. Like I say, if we all went out tonight and howled in the night and we started getting something howling back, or we heard tree knocking, I mean, geez, the experience is so immeasurable as far as how it affects you, right? And you're telling stories about your friends and stuff. You find a hair that you collected because something opened a jar of peanut butter that you left and left a hair there. It just doesn't seem that significant to the whole experience. But if you look at unlocking where we need to go with the recognition of Bigfoot as an actual scientifically recognized species, that this DNA is so invaluable at this point that,
Yeah, anybody who doesn't want to see the results of a full genome done on a Bigfoot has no interest in Bigfoot.
Right.
I have none. I mean, don't we want to know what it is, where it came from, where it evolved from? It's going to leave other trace evidence, but to me, DNA is still the ultimate.
You don't necessarily need a ton of samples to analyze at the level that a lab is able to analyze them at now to get to where we want to go. I mean, we don't need thousands of DNA samples, but collecting, let's say I've got 2 or 3 or even 4 individuals that are interacting in my site, and I get 30 samples. I mean, they could all be from one creature or 2 creatures, So you start looking at how valuable it is to get a sample out of Washington and out of Idaho and Manitoba and British Columbia, as well as New York or Ohio or Florida. You start getting these where they're just so geographically spread and comparing them and start mapping how they're similar. I think there's a lot of value in that than just collecting all your samples from one area, obviously. So when people say, well, geez, haven't they already done this? Well, you could get 10 samples out of Washington State, but is that really going to satisfy the scientific community of what's happening with this phenomena all over North America and beyond, So Doug had made the comment earlier that, look, we only need 15 samples, right? Understanding that what it would take to establish this baseline, like I say, it's not thousands of samples. It's just the samples that we know were collected, and we know, looking at, like Doug says, if you could see that a Bigfoot hair has 5 cells or scales, so to speak, around its diameter, whereas humans have 6 or 7. Well, before you're going to spend 10 grand to analyze a hair, let's determine that threshold first. Is it a 5-cell diameter? If it is, yeah, it's past that first level of scrutiny. Let's bring it in to the lab and start looking at, the mitochondrial DNA, the nuclear DNA, and mapping this specimen out. And it's just the value of having samples that are collected in a way where we aren't guessing what they're from. We kind of have a good idea of what they're from because of how we collected them. I know that when I find a hair on that ball, it's not a horse. It's not, it's got to be something capable of picking up a ball and moving it 80 yards and setting it back down,
Yeah. I'm sorry I couldn't bring all those pictures up. They're all going to be on my community tab, though.
Yeah, so people will be able to look at those. And then also, we had said that Doug was going to share a couple of the videos that we had gotten from his live cams. Just interesting ones.
I'll try to get them up there.
I'm not heavily into the paranormal thing, but he's got some great videos of like an orb.
Yeah, we have
chasing an orb.
We don't have any idea what they are. They're just odd.
Well, Legend Meets Science 2, Doug, sometime next month. Hopefully all you guys can check that out. And Jeff, thanks very much for coming back on and giving me the rundown and all of that stuff. It's very interesting, if complicated.
Yeah. I think Doug froze up there or maybe not. The Legend Meets Science.
He's still like a master of.
Well, the Legend Meets Science 2 is probably, people need to understand the amount of time that it goes into trying to produce something at this level and getting labs to analyze these things. And stuff. It's probably at the earliest a 2022 release, isn't it, Doug? I mean,
Yep.
I mean, it ain't going to happen in 60 days.
Next year, Cornell.
But look out for it. But yeah, that sounds like a multi-year production. So look forward to seeing it. And Jeff, thanks very much for coming on. And I'll see you guys later.
Thanks, Cornell.
You bet.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Good night.